somewhere in the frozen dark of medieval Europe, a secret was buried. And for 800 years, nobody thought to dig it up. Think about what that means. 30 degrees below zero. No heating system. No insulation. No glass on the windows. No electricity. Nothing between a family of 5 and a winter that killed livestock where they stood. And yet, inside one particular kind of house, built from materials you could gather with your bare hands, a fire burned low, children slept soundly, and morning came. Not once, not by chance. For centuries, across thousands of villages, it kept happening, and the people who lived through it never wrote down why. They didn't need to. The knowledge lived in their hands, in their walls, in the way they cut a doorframe, and packed a roof, and laid a floor. It was never spoken. It was simply done. And then, slowly, we forgot it entirely. Picture the scene. You are standing outside a house in northern Scandinavia, roughly 900 years ago. The wind is moving fast and low across an open field. The kind of wind that does not gust. It presses, constantly, like a hand flat against your chest. The temperature has not risen above freezing in 6 weeks. The snow is not falling anymore. It has simply accumulated, silently, until it reaches the lower edge of the roof. The walls of the house in front of you are dark with age and cold. There is no chimney. There is no light coming through the windows, because there are no windows, only small wooden shutters pulled tight against the dark. By every measure you were raised to trust, no living thing should be inside that structure. And then you hear it, a low sound, the murmur of a voice, the soft knock of something wooden, the steady rhythm of breath. Life. Warm, deliberate, unhurried life, on the other side of a wall that the outside world has no idea how to penetrate. That is the mystery. Not just that they survived, but that they built something capable of holding warmth in conditions that should have made warmth impossible. Archaeologists who have spent careers excavating these structures describe the same quiet shock every time. These were not accidents of construction. Every element of that house, the walls, the roof, the floor, the doorway, even the distance between it and the next building, was part of one interconnected system. A system so effective that modern passive house engineers are still reverse engineering its principles today, stunned to find that medieval builders got there first, without a single equation. But here is the part that changes everything. The most critical element in that entire system was not the fire. It was not the walls. It was not even the roof that trapped heat like a sealed envelope. The thing that made all of it work, the foundation every other layer depended on, was something so simple, so overlooked, that most people walk past it without a second thought. It was right there, beneath their feet. And understanding it will completely change the way you see the coming winter. Start with the walls, because the walls are where the first surprise lives. When archaeologists began excavating medieval homes across England, Germany, and Scandinavia, they expected to find primitive construction, rough, improvised, held together by desperation. What they found instead stopped them cold. The primary building technique across most of northern Europe was called wattle and daub, a lattice of woven branches coated thick with a mixture of clay, straw, and animal hair. It looks crude. It looks almost embarrassingly low-tech. But here is what those archaeologists kept measuring and kept finding difficult to explain away. Those walls stored heat, not in any mystical sense, but in a precise thermodynamic sense. The clay absorbed warmth from the fire throughout the day, held it deep within its mass, and released it slowly through the night, long after the flames had faded to nothing. In Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, pine and spruce logs exceeding 2 feet in thickness were fitted tightly together and sealed at every joint with moss, wool, and bark. The result was a wall that functioned less like a barrier and more like a battery, charged by day, discharging warmth through the coldest hours of darkness. NASA engineers today call this passive thermal regulation. Medieval builders had a simpler name for it. They called it not freezing to death. But the walls could only hold warmth that already existed inside the house, which raises a question that grows more urgent the longer you sit with it. Where did that warmth come from at 3 in the morning, when the embers had gone quiet and the temperature outside had dropped another 10 degrees? The answer begins above your head. The roof of a medieval house was never just a covering. It was, in many ways, the most sophisticated element of the entire structure. Across northern Europe, roofs were built from thick layers of straw, reed, rye, or heather, compressed until they formed a blanket, sometimes 2 feet deep. The principle is identical to every high-performance insulation material manufactured today: trapped air. Still, motionless air is one of nature's most effective insulators, and a well-built thatched roof contained millions of tiny pockets of it locked between every fiber. The steep pitch solved 2 problems at once. Snow slid away before its weight became dangerous, and rain drained fast before it could soak into the structure. But something else was happening inside those roofs that no one planned deliberately. In homes without chimneys, smoke rose from the central fire and passed slowly upward through the thatch, coating every layer with soot and natural resins. Over decades, the roof grew denser, more water-resistant, harder for insects to penetrate. A thatched roof, 50 years old, protected better than one newly laid. Think about what that means. In a world where almost everything deteriorated with age, tools, clothing, food stores, even the bodies of the people inside, the roof was one of the only things that genuinely improved the longer it stood. In Iceland, thick blocks of turf created living roofs that held warmth with an almost geological stubbornness. In Scandinavia, birch bark, waterproofed by its own natural oils, lined the structure beneath. Every region found its own answer. Every answer worked by the same principle: trap the air, hold the heat, keep winter out. But here is what neither the walls nor the roof could fully address. The cold did not only come from the sides or from above, it rose from beneath, quietly, constantly, without mercy, from the ground itself. That is the enemy most people never think about, and the one medieval builders understood with a clarity that should embarrass us. Bare frozen earth pulls heat downward with a persistence that no fire can fully overcome. So medieval families never left it bare. Floors were covered in deep layers of straw, dried moss, reeds, and evergreen branches, materials that trapped still air close to the ground and created a breathing barrier between frozen earth and the soles of their feet. Wealthier households raised wooden floors on timber joists to create an insulating air gap beneath the entire living space. The doorway received the same obsessive attention. Every time it opened, cold rushed in and warmth rushed out, a small catastrophe repeated dozens of times each day. So builders armored it: thick oak doors sealed with packed moss and leather, heavy wool curtains on the inside, and in larger homes, a small entrance chamber, a proto-vestibule, that forced cold air to lose most of its strength before reaching the living space. And the windows were perhaps the most deliberate decision of all. They were small, not because medieval builders lacked skill, small because they understood something it takes modern architects a spreadsheet to calculate. Every square inch of opening is a negotiation with the winter outside. Some negotiations you cannot afford to make. Where glass was unavailable, which was almost everywhere, builders stretched oiled linen, thin horn panels, or dried pig bladder across the frame. Enough light to work by, enough barrier to survive by, nothing wasted, nothing given away for free. The shell was complete. Walls that stored heat like clay batteries. Roofs that trapped warmth like a sealed envelope. Floors that fought the frozen earth beneath them. Doors and windows guarding every degree with quiet ferocity. By any reasonable measure, it should have been enough, but the shell had one fundamental limitation. It could slow the loss of heat with extraordinary efficiency. What it could not do was create heat from nothing. And what kept those families alive through the deepest hours of a medieval winter was something far stranger, far more alive, and far more unexpected than any wall or roof or carefully packed floor could ever be. The fire was never just a fire. In a medieval home, every flame was a decision, every log a calculation, and every ember a small act of faith extended toward morning. In the earliest houses, the hearth sat directly in the center of the room, not against a wall, not tucked into a corner, but in the middle, by design. Heat radiated outward equally in every direction, warming the clay walls on all sides so they could do their slow work through the night. Smoke rose toward the roof, and left something behind as it passed through the thatch. A gradual coat of soot and resin that hardened the fibers, sealed out moisture, and kept insects from taking hold. 1 flame, 3 jobs, 0 waste. After the 12th century, when stone fireplaces became more common, chimneys solved the smoke problem, but carried valuable heat outside with it. Medieval masons responded by building deep stone fireboxes, angled to throw radiant heat back into the room, quietly recovering what the chimney tried to steal. The fuel was chosen with the same precision. Dense hardwoods were cut in late summer and dried through autumn to burn hotter and longer when winter arrived. In Ireland and Scotland, peat blocks cut from the bogs burned slowly and steadily through the coldest nights. And before sleep, glowing coals were covered carefully with ash, banked and preserved like something precious, because they were. The fire did not go out, it simply slept. But wood could run short, storms could delay cutting, and even the most carefully managed fire could lose its battle against a night that dropped 40 degrees before sunrise. For those long, silent hours, when the fire had given everything it had, medieval families had a second source of heat, one that never needed feeding, one that never went cold, one that had been sleeping beside them all along. It sounds, at first, like a story about poverty. Families and livestock sharing the same roof, cows at one end, people at the other, children sleeping within earshot of animals breathing in the dark. The modern instinct reads that as desperation, as the last resort of people with no better options. That instinct is wrong. What those medieval builders had constructed was not a compromise. It was one of the most elegant passive heating solutions in human history. A single adult cow generates between 400 and 800 watts of continuous body heat, around the clock, through every hour of the night, without burning a single piece of wood. Multiply that across sheep, pigs, goats, and oxen. The accumulated warmth drifting gently through a timber partition into the living space was not insignificant. It was the difference between waking up and not waking up. Archaeologists excavating medieval longhouses in Iceland have confirmed that people and livestock shared the same continuous structure for centuries, not as an emergency measure, but as a refined architectural strategy built deliberately into the floor plan. Even the floor beneath the animals contributed. Straw and moss, laid thick across the ground, slowly decomposed, and decomposition generates heat, a quiet, biological warmth rising from beneath, adding one more invisible layer to the system. Today, a modern household spends thousands of dollars on a heating system that requires electricity, demands maintenance, and breaks down in the coldest weather. Medieval families had a heating system that ate grass, needed no electricity, and got up and walked around. It was not primitive. It was, by almost any engineering measure, brilliant. The only question is why we ever thought otherwise. But the house, the walls, the roof, the fire, the animals, was only part of the equation. The other part was the people themselves. Modern physiology has confirmed what medieval families knew through lived experience. The human body genuinely adapts to cold. Repeated exposure over weeks and months improves circulation, increases baseline heat production, and raises the threshold at which cold becomes dangerous. Medieval people were cold every day from October through March, and because of that, their bodies became progressively better at managing it, finding an equilibrium with the season that people living in climate-controlled spaces have almost entirely lost. At night, beds were precision thermal environments. Mattresses of straw, wool, or goose feathers trapped warm air in a deep insulating layer around the body. 4-poster beds, hung with heavy curtains, created a room within the room, a sealed chamber that held body heat through the darkest hours with remarkable efficiency. Families slept close together, not out of sentimentality, but out of strategy. Multiple layers of wool trapped still air against the skin exactly the way thatch trapped it above the roof. Animal fat rubbed onto exposed skin sealed against wind-driven heat loss with a simplicity no modern product has meaningfully improved upon. Their bodies did not simply endure the winter. They learned it, finding a rhythm inside it the way a river finds the shape of its bed, not by resisting the banks, but by moving with them. But no single family accomplished this alone. The final layer of this system, the one that held everything else together when everything else reached its limit, was not found inside any building at all. It was found in the space between them. If you could look down at a medieval village from above, from the height of a bird crossing a frozen sky, what you would see would not look like a collection of separate houses. It would look like a single organism. The homes clustered so tightly that in some villages, you could reach out a window and almost touch the wall of the house next door. For centuries, historians assumed this was about safety, or land efficiency, or the social instinct of people who feared isolation. All of those things were true, but none of them was the primary reason. The primary reason was heat. When houses stand close together, they shelter each other. The narrow gaps between them break the force of the wind before it can press against any single wall at full strength. The air trapped in those lanes and courtyards warms slightly compared to the open fields beyond. Not enough to feel on your skin, but enough to matter when you are measuring survival in degrees. Medieval builders oriented their houses with the same deliberate logic. The narrow end faced north, presenting the smallest possible surface to the prevailing wind. The long southern wall stretched open to catch whatever winter sunlight the short days offered. Barns and storage buildings were positioned along the northern edge of the village as a first line of defense. Massive, wind-absorbing structures that took the initial force of every storm, so the homes behind them did not have to. Hills, tree lines, and rocky outcroppings were read as assets, not obstacles, and villages were sited specifically to use them. At the center stood the communal oven, a heavy stone structure that held heat for hours after its fire died, drawing families together to bake, repair tools, and share warmth in equal measure. Medieval builders did not design a house. They designed a living organism, and every house was a cell within it, each one made stronger by its proximity to the next. But even the most perfectly designed organism fails if it is not fed at the right moment. And the moment that determined whether a village survived the winter was not December. It was not November. It was not even October. It was July. The preparation for winter began in the middle of summer, when the days were still long and the fields still green, and it never stopped until the first thaw arrived months later. Firewood was the first priority. Oak, beech, and ash were cut in late summer when the sap had settled, then split and stacked to dry through autumn. Wood that had not been properly seasoned burned wet, produced less heat, and filled the house with excess smoke. A small miscalculation that could mean the difference between a family that stayed warm and a family that ran short in February. Food was the second front. Smoked fish and salted meat were prepared in quantity. Hard cheeses pressed and stored. Root vegetables packed into cool cellars. Fermented cabbage preserved in brine provided vitamins through months when nothing fresh would grow. And animal fat, rendered and stored in sealed clay pots, was treated with the same seriousness as grain. Because a body eating too little fat in deep winter is a body whose internal furnace is slowly going cold. The house itself was winterized with equal thoroughness. Walls recoated with fresh clay, roof thatch inspected and repaired, door frames repacked with moss, drainage cleared so snowmelt would run away from the foundations rather than soaking into the base of the walls. And none of this was done by a single family alone. The entire village participated, because everyone understood one truth that required no explanation. One unprepared household was a vulnerability for all of them. Preparation was not a personal virtue in medieval village life. It was a communal obligation. A medieval winter did not begin in December. It began in July. In every log stacked, every fish smoked, every crack sealed against a cold that had not yet arrived, but was already, in some sense, already on its way. What all of it required, from the longhouse design to the communal oven to the summer preparation, was a particular way of seeing the world. Medieval people did not experience winter as a problem to be solved or an enemy to be defeated. They experienced it as a teacher, a harsh one, an unforgiving one, but a teacher nonetheless. Snow became an insulating layer packed around the base of walls. Smoke became a wood preservative, a food curing agent, a roof sealant. Animals became living radiators. Straw became the floor itself, the insulating layer between frozen earth and sleeping children. Nothing in that world carried only one meaning. Everything was asked to do more than one job, and winter was the force that taught them to ask. They did not conquer it. They learned it, the way a craftsman learns the grain of a particular wood, not by fighting its nature, but by understanding it so completely that working with it becomes second nature. They became, across long centuries of that education, the most fluent readers of code the human world has ever produced. And that teacher is still teaching. The principles pressed into the clay of those medieval homes are still present in the architecture we are only now beginning to rediscover. Which is exactly where we are going next. Here is something that should stop you cold. Right now, in architecture schools and sustainable design studios across Europe and North America, engineers are presenting their most advanced work in energy-efficient construction. Buildings that use thermal mass to stabilize interior temperature, layered insulation systems that trap still air between membranes, entrance airlocks that prevent warm air from escaping, passive solar orientation that captures winter sunlight through carefully angled facades. They present these ideas with charts and equations and computational models, and every single one of those ideas was already present in a medieval farmhouse built by a man who could not read, using materials he pulled from the ground with his hands, guided by nothing more than the memory of what his father had built and the hard knowledge of what had kept his family alive through the last winter. The passive house movement, one of the most celebrated developments in modern sustainable architecture, is, in its most essential principles, a rediscovery, a slow, expensive, mathematically rigorous journey back to conclusions that a medieval builder reached through the only laboratory that has ever truly mattered: survival itself. 800 years of technological progress, and we are arriving, with great ceremony, at the door of a house that was already there. The walls stored the heat, the roof trapped it, the floor protected it, the fire produced it, the animals gave it freely through the night, the village multiplied it. The preparation preserved it, the bodies of the people inside adapted to live within it. Remove any single layer and the system weakened. Hold them all together and something remarkable emerged. Not comfort in the modern sense, not luxury, not ease, but something older and more durable than any of those things. Resilience. They did not build houses. They built a promise, pressed into clay and timber and packed moss and carefully banked embers. A promise made to the children sleeping near the fire and to the children those children would one day have. The promise was simple: morning will come. We will be here when it does. That promise was kept. Winter after winter, century after century, by people whose names we will never know, in houses that left almost no trace. And the principles they discovered, earned through cold and patience and the particular wisdom that only hardship teaches, those principles did not disappear. They were only forgotten. And what is forgotten can always be found again. This is Primal Echoes, where the ancient world speaks, and we learn to listen again. Every civilization that survived impossible conditions left behind a blueprint, not always in writing, not always in monuments, but in the shape of their walls, the angle of their roofs, the distance between their houses. These are the blueprints we study here. If this story changed the way you see the winter outside your window, we want to hear it. Tell us in the comments, which part of this system surprised you most? Was it the living warmth of the animals? The roof that improved with age? The village designed as a single breathing machine? And if you want to keep going deeper into the forgotten ingenuity of the ancient world, stay with us. The past is not behind us. It is underneath us, holding us up, exactly the way it always has.